Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Pe Vav. We're learning about the crimes for which one is liable to chenek. And we saw the Mishnah that kidnapping is among those crimes. The Mishnah mentioned a few details about it, and now we're going to quote a midrash halacha that from which we derive many of these details. Tenor Banan, Ki maseh ish koneb nefesh me'achav. This midrash halacha starts off with the pasuk in Sefer Devarim. We can look at it inside, 24/7. Ki maseh ish koneb nefesh me'achav ibnei Israel, if someone kidnaps a person from among his brethren, we'll see what that means, hitamer bo umcharo, and uses him, works him, or sells him, umet haganavahu bi'ata hara mikirbecha, so that person who does the kidnapping should die to get rid of the evil among you. So we're going to analyze this pasuk. En li ela ish sheganav isha minayin. Based on this pasuk, I would only know that if a male, is the kidnapper, he gets the death penalty. But what if a woman is the kidnapper? Here it only says ish. Maybe ish only means a male. That's why we have another pasuk in Shemot that says vegonev ish. Let's look at that pasuk inside. Vegonev ish umcharov nimsa biyado mot yumat. So here there is no subject. So it means anyone who steals a person and sells him and is found in his hand, that person will die. So that's how we know that woman kidnapper is also liable. Enli ela ish sheganav ben isha ben ish v'isha sheganba ish. Fine, based on these two pesukim, I know that a male who steals, whether he steals a man or a woman, is liable. And I also know that a woman who steals a man, because it says Zugonev ish. But what we don't know yet is Isha sheganba isha minayin. What if a woman kidnaps another woman? So what pasuk can we learn that is also liable from? Talmud Omar umet haganavahu mikol makom. From the continuation of the pasuk in Devarim, it says that a thief will die. So that's coming to include all cases. Anyone who kidnaps anyone is liable. Tanya idach. There's another braita that says ki maseh ish gonev nefesh me'achav. Echad gonev et ha'ish ve'echad gonev et ha'isha ve'echad ger ve'echad aibed meshuchrar ve'katan hayav. So here we quote again the pasuk in Devarim. If someone kidnaps a person from among his brethren, so this is going to include whether one steals a man or steals a woman or kidnaps a convert or kidnaps a slave who was freed. An Eved Kanani who was freed is the same effectively as a convert. They become fully Jewish. And a minor, one is liable to the death penalty for kidnapping any of these people. And as we said, one has to kidnap the person and also sell the person. However, even if he sold him, but he didn't hand over the kidnapped person yet. So the kidnapper came, he got some guy off the street, took him to his house, and then made a deal of a sale with someone, but hasn't delivered over the kidnapped person yet and still in his house. Patur he has to kidnap the person, bring him into his own domain, and sell him and hand him over to the seller, to the buyer. Mecharo le'aviv o le'achiv o le'achad min ha'kerubim chayav. If the kidnapper went and he kidnapped some person and sold the victim to the victim's own father or to the victim's own brothers or to one of the relatives of the victim, nevertheless, the kidnapper is liable. This is a bit surprising. You might think that if he kidnapped him and then sold him back to the family, then basically he's back with the family. So the Gemara will discuss this and will end up contradicting it actually. And lastly, hagonevet avadim patur, someone who kidnaps a slave, meaning a full Eved Kanani. We talked about Eved Kanani who was freed. Well, that person becomes a full Jew. But if he kidnaps an Eved Kanani while he's fully an Eved Kanani, he is not liable. Taneh Tana kameh de Rav Sheshat. Now, a professional memorizer who recited Baraitot recited this very Baraita that we just learned in front of Rav Sheshat. And Rav Sheshat was critical of it. Amar le ani shoneh Rabbi Shimon omer me'echav ad shiosienu mershut echav ve'at amart chayab Teneh patur. He says, I have a braita that teaches that according to Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the student of Rabbi Akiva, he learns from the word me'echav. If someone kidnaps someone from among his brethren, that means that one has to remove him from among his brethren. In other words, someone is only liable, capital punishment for kidnapping, if he goes and takes someone and then sells the person to an outsider and removes the person from his family. But if he steals someone and then sells him back to the family, well, that's not called removing from the family. So therefore, if you sell the victim back to his family, it should be patur. And you said chayav. That's what we just said over here. If he sells him back to his father or his brother, then chayav. So Rav Sheshet tells the memorizer, you have the wrong version. You should teach it as patur. So you see that the professional memorizers, they had a huge data bank because they had great memories. And then they would review them with the Amorah. And here the Amorah says, okay, it's great that you memorized that, but you got the wrong version. And so, based on this other baraita, Rav Sheshet corrected it to patur. So in fact, if you sell it back to a family member, then the kidnapper is not liable. Now we say, my kushya, why was Rav Sheshet so bothered by this? Dilma Rabbi Shimon Harabanan. Maybe the baraita that Rabbi Shimon quoted, that Rav Sheshet quoted, is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and he says patur. But the other baraita over here that the Tana quoted, maybe that's according to Chachamim, who disagree with Rabbi Shimon, and they say chayav. So maybe there's just two different opinions here. Why do we have to reconcile them? And we answer, La sakada techta, Rabbi Yochanan, setam matnitin Rabbi Meir, setam tosefta Rabbi Nechemia, setam sifra Rabbi Yehuda, setam sifre Rabbi Shimon, v'chulahu alibad Rabbi Akiva. No, it's not possible to say that because this baraita is an explanation of the pasuk in Devarim. So this baraita is actually a quotation from Sifrei Devarim. That's the Midrash Halacha on Sefer Devarim. And we know who the author of that work is because Rabbi Yochanan taught us that an anonymous Mishnah we can assume is Rabbi Meir. An anonymous Tosefta is Rabbi Nechemia. An anonymous Sifra, that's the Midrash on Sefer Vayikra, is Rabbi Yehuda. And an anonymous Sifrei is what we call the Midrash Halacha on Bemidbar, and Devarim is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And all of these are students of Rabbi Akiva. So they're all delivering the teachings that they learned from Rabbi Akiva, but they're the ones responsible for redacting, editing, putting together this work. This doesn't necessarily mean that every single anonymous Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Sometimes the Gemara says not so. Right? Who's the anonymous Mishnah? And they'll name someone else. But it means, unless otherwise stated, unless otherwise researched, we can assume that a Mishnah is Rabbi Meir and the Stam Sifrei is Rabbi Shimon. And so this is a Stam Sifrei, this baraita, and therefore we assume it is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And that's what Rav Sheshet says, that Rabbi Shimon can't say two different things, and therefore I trust my baraita, you should correct your baraita and say patur instead of hayav. Hagonev beno, the next case in the Mishnah is someone who kidnaps his own son. There's machloket. Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka says he is liable. After all, he is kidnapping, but Rabbanan say, no, he's not liable. So we ask, my tamad Rabbanan, what's Rabbanan's source? He is kidnapping after all, so what's the difference if it's his own son, who probably lives in the same house as he does? Amar Abaye damar kera ki yimaseh perat lemasui. Abaye says we learn it from the pasuk that says, ki yimaseh, if there shall be found. We're reading this as an active. If you go find someone and kidnap them, but that excludes someone who's already found in the custody of the kidnapper. And since the son is already in the custody, probably even in the same house, but certainly under the domain, under the control of the father, so you can't call that kidnapping because he's already there with the father. So therefore, the father does not get the death penalty for kidnapping his own son. Rav Papa asks Abaye, if you're going to interpret ki maseh, that will only prohibit a case where you go out and do something, but if the other partner in the transgression is already within one's domain, then one does not get the death penalty. Well, then I can apply that same methodology to a different pasuk regarding adultery. Here it says ki maseh ish, if it is found that a person is sleeping with a woman who is married, so that's adultery. So would you say here also, ki maseh perat masui, only if a man goes to another person's house and sleeps with the woman in that house, someone else's wife, then he's liable to adultery. But let's say they're already living in the same house. How could that be? Kegon shel bet peloni dishchichan gabayhu hachinameh diftiri. For example, the house of so-and-so. they're referring to an actual person's house, Mr. whatever, but they didn't want to say Lashon Hara in the Gemara, so they didn't mention the name of a certain house, but there was a certain family where there were multiple couples that were all living in the same house together. And so since the men and women to whom they are not married were already under the same roof, so would you say that in that case, if one of them committed adultery, that they would not be liable because it's ki maseh, but if it's already masui, if the other person's already there, then one is not liable? That wouldn't make sense. Nobody would say that. And so Abaye said, no, when I was quoting it, I actually was not referring to the pasuk ki maseh in Devarim, but rather the pasuk in Shemot that says v'nimsa biyado. That there's no pasuk like that regarding adultery. So I'm not learning from ki maseh. In fact, for adultery, doesn't matter where the man and where the woman live and where they are, one is always going to be liable. But for kidnapping, it says v'nimsa biyado, that it turns up in his hand. That means it was not in his hand before, and that's why Rabbanan exclude a father, because with a father, the son is already in his custody always. Amar Rava hilka chane mikre dardeke umatnu Rabbanan kimsuyin biyadan damu uftire. Rava says another application of this law, besides a father and son, is also a teacher, either a teacher of scripture, that teaching little children Tanakh, or those who teach Mishnah, Torah Shebe'al Peh, which would be a little older children. If the teacher should kidnap the child, the teacher would not get capital punishment because the students are already under the roof, under the custody of the teacher. So you can't say that he went and took them because they are already under his domain. Ganav mi shechetzyo. Now, the next part of the Mishnah says, if someone kidnaps a person who is half free and half slave, like if someone was owned, an Eved Kanani owned by two people, partners, and then one of them frees him, so now he's half and half. If someone would abduct such a person, Rabbi Yehuda says he is liable, and the Rabbanan say he is not liable. Tenan hatam. There's a Mishnah in Baba Kama. We're going to try to derive the reasoning for Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan based on an analogous methodology that they use in law regarding embarrassing others. So we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omed en la'avadim boshet. Rabbi Yehuda says that there is no liability to pay for embarrassment of a slave. My tamad Rabbi Yehuda. What's his source? Amar keraki nasu anashiv yachtav ish ve'achiv. The pasuk says if two men are fighting together, and then the relative of one of the men goes and grabs the privates of one of the people, one of the fighters, the other one, that's not her husband, then they have to pay. And this is the classic case of embarrassment. It's not that it causes a permanent injury, but it is very embarrassing. So we learned that one pays for embarrassment. If you injure someone, you pay for 5 things, and one of them is the feeling of embarrassment that one gets. So we learn from here, the pasuk says that who's fighting? Ish ve'achiv. It has to be someone who's called a brother. It's not going to be probably literally the brother, although sometimes brothers actually fight, but it means 2 people who can be called brothers. But that will exclude someone who has no brotherhood. Who has no brotherhood? A slave. A slave on a legal level, his biological relatives are not considered his legal relatives, and therefore he has no brotherhood. And that's the verse from which the Yehuda learns that one does not have to pay indemnity for embarrassing a slave. V'Rabbanan, achiv hu b'misvot. Rabbanan say, no, when it says to exclude a brother, that's not excluding a slave that has no brotherhood from a legal point of view, but rather it's excluding someone who is not your brother in mitzvot. And so you only have to pay for someone who is obligated in mitzvot, and Eved Kana'ani is obligated in mitzvot, because once they become an Eved Kana'ani, they do a half conversion, and Eved Kana'ani is liable in all mitzvot that women are also obligated in. And therefore, according to Rabbanan, if someone causes embarrassment to a slave, they do have to pay for the embarrassment. Okay, that's a machloket in that regard, but it does mention the word achiv and 2 different interpretations of achiv, whether it excludes a slave or includes a slave. So now we're going to apply that to our case. of someone who kidnaps a slave or half a slave. Sabad me'echav lapuke abadim. So when the pasuk says if someone kidnaps a person, me'echav, that means, according to the Biuda, only if you kidnap someone who has brotherhood, and that will exclude someone who has no brotherhood. That's a slave has no brotherhood, and therefore kidnapping a slave, not liable, according to the Biuda. Bnei Israel, lemu'ute mi shechesyo eved v'chesyo ben chorin. Mi bnei Israel, lemu'ute mi shechesyo eved v'chesyo ben chorin. Have mi'ut achal mi'ut, ve'en mi'ut achal mi'ut, ela lerabot. Now the next words, let's look back in the pasuk to see what we're talking about. Ki maseh ish goneb nefesh me'echav mi bnei Israel. If someone kidnaps a person from among his brethren, from among Bnei Israel. So you see that there's a lot of doubling here. You really could just say me'echav. You don't have to say anything at all. Or you could say me'echav Bnei Israel if you want to make sure echav means all Bnei Israel. But the extra mem is even more extraneous. Me'echav mi Bnei Israel. So we're going to learn something from the mem and also from the fact that it says Bnei Israel at all. So from the fact that it says Bnei Israel, let's say it said me'echav Bnei Israel. So we would say that's going to exclude someone who's half slave and half free, then no capital punishment for that case. But from the mem, so the mem is also a limiting particle, and so we're going to learn the same thing. The mem by itself also will exclude someone who is half slave and half free. Now this is a double exclusion. There's no need to have two exclusions back to back about the same thing. You already told me that a half person is excluded. Why would you say and again that this person is excluded? So now we apply the rule that when you have an exclusion followed by another exclusion, it actually works the opposite way, kind of like a double negative, and now it's actually coming to include that person. And therefore, according to the Biuda, if someone steals a full slave, so there's no brotherhood there, exempt from capital punishment. But if one steals someone who's half free and half slave, then one is liable to capital punishment. This is the source of the Biuda in the Mishnah. ורבנן, מאחיו לפוקי עבדים, למה שמע להו, תהה אחיו הוא במצוות. When Rabbanan come to the same pasuk and they see the word me'achav, they are not going to use it to exclude an Eved Kana'ani. They don't think that's what it means because they don't agree that the word me'achav is excluding someone who has no brotherhood, but rather they think it means a brother in mitzvot. And an Eved Kana'ani is your brother in mitzvot because an Eved Kana'ani is liable regarding most of the mitzvot. And so therefore, they're not going to learn anything from this word about our current issue. And instead, we move on to the next word. Bnei Israel, mi Bnei Israel, chadamut eved, v'chadamut mi shechesyo ebed, v'chesyo ben chorin. Instead, they focus on Bnei Israel and the mem of Bnei Israel. So we have two exclusions, two limitations. One of them is to exclude an Eved Kanani. So we don't learn it from Me'achav, although the Rabbanan agree that if you steal an Eved Kanani, then you're not liable. They don't learn it from Me'achav, they learn it from Bnei Israel. And the mem will come to exclude someone who is half free and half a slave. That one is not liable for that person either. And so that's how we know that according to Rabbanan, we're excluding both a full slave and a half slave. One is not liable for kidnapping them. Whereas, according to the Biuda, since he uses me'achav to exclude a slave, so he agrees on that point, but then he has two things to exclude, Bnei Israel and the mem, and therefore you have a double exclusion, must actually be an inclusion, and that's why the Biuda says that one is liable for kidnapping someone who is half free and half a slave. Azhara legonev nefesh minayin. We already saw the pisukim from which we learned the punishment for kidnapping, but from where do we learn the warning, the basic prohibition? You always need two pisukim, one that gives the azhara, the basic prohibition, and then another one that gives the punishment. So where is the basic warning prohibition come from? Rabbi Yoshia amar mi lo tignov. Rabbi Yochanan amar mi lo yimacheru mimkeret abed vela peligi mor kachashib lav de geneva mor kachashib lav de mechira. Rabbi Yoshia says, we learn it from the 10 Commandments. It says, Lo tignov. That's the 8th commandment. Usually we translate that as don't steal. But he says, no, it doesn't mean don't steal money. It's referring to don't steal a person. Rabbi Yochanan says we learn it from do not sell a person like a slave. Now, in context, it's talking about reselling an Eved Ivri. You can't resell them on the market. But Rabbi Yochanan takes this to refer to someone who you kidnap kidnap, one is not allowed to sell. But Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yochanan are not actually arguing against each other. Rather, they are delineating two parts of this crime. In order to be liable to capital punishment, you have to do, in fact, a double crime. You have to kidnap the person and sell them. So the warning against kidnapping is from Lo Tignov, and the warning against selling them is from Lo Yimacheru. So they work together. Tenorabanan. And now, a Baraita, a Midrash Halacha, from which we learn that Lo Tignov does in fact refer to kidnapping in the Ten Commandments. Lo tignov begonen nefashot hakol tahtu medaber. The commandment Lo tignov is talking about kidnapping. Atamer begonen nefashot o ano ela begonen mamon. The typical style of midrash halacha is to state a thesis and then question that thesis. So it says, you say that, it's as if someone else is talking to the first interlocutor. And it says, you say that Lo tignov is talking about stealing a person. Maybe it's actually talking about stealing money. Amarta seul mad mishelosh asre midosh shatran nidreshet by and we'll answer that person, go learn from the 13 interpretive principles by which the Torah is explained, and the 12th out of the 13 is a matter that is derived from the context. So look at the context of Lo Tignov within the Ten Commandments. Look at the 6th commandment is do not murder. That's capital punishment. And the next one, don't commit adultery. That's capital punishment. So it makes sense that the next one is going in a list of capital punishments, and therefore the next one of don't steal must be kidnapping, because that would also be capital punishment. It makes sense, more sense within the context, and that's how we know. Tanya Idach, there is another braita regarding Lo Tignovu, a different pasuk in Parashat Kedoshim by Yikra 19 that says do not steal. It says in plural. This is Lo Tignov, this is Lo Tignovu. That's how you know it's different. Begoneb mamon hakatu medaber. This pasuk is telling you about stealing money. Now, how do you know? How do you know stealing money? Maybe this is talking about kidnapping, in fact. So over here also, we will say, go and apply one of the 13 interpretive principles by which the Torah is explained. And this is, again, the 12th one. Look at the context. What's the context over there? Is talking about stealing money. All right, the pasuk after this, pasuk 13 says, "Don't exploit your neighbor, don't rob him, pay your workers on time." And so these are all monetary transgressions, and therefore this one also is a monetary transgression, one that you have to pay money if you do it. So that's would be with stealing money and not with stealing people. And so these actually work together, because if both of them would be stealing money, then you don't need two pesukim for stealing money. So since this one is stealing money, that adds to the proof that the one in the Ten Commandments is in fact about kidnapping. Itmar, Chizkiah Amar en Neheragin. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Neheragin. Now let's say you have one set of witnesses that say, we saw this person, he kidnapped someone. And then a second set of witnesses come and say, we saw that this same kidnapper sold the victim to someone else. Now, if we combine the two sets of witnesses, which we do, then we give capital punishment to this perpetrator. But what if both sets of witnesses are found to be edim zomamim? They were not even in town on that day. They could not have seen it. Now, generally, we give edim zomamim the very punishment that they tried to apply to the person that they testified about, which would mean that they should get capital punishment, because if we accepted their testimony, this perpetrator, this defendant, would get capital punishment. Chizkiah, however, says, no, they do not get capital punishment. Rabbi Yochanan says they do get capital punishment. Now, why? Chizkiah damar ki Rabbi Akiva damar davar velo chasi davar. Chizkiah is following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. He says when we have the pasuk, al pi shanayim edim or shelosha edim yakum davar. The word davar is referring to testimony. So, in order to apply the law of edim zoamin and give the edim zoamin the same punishment that they were going to give to the defendant, it has to be that they are testifying about the entire matter. So, only if you have, let's say, one set of witnesses that say, we saw the person kidnap and sell, and they're found to be edim zoamin, since those witnesses are fully and wholly responsible for this guy possibly getting convicted, almost getting convicted, almost getting killed. He was convicted, but almost even getting killed for it. So in that case, if it was one set of witnesses on the whole process, we would give them capital punishment. But here, each set of witnesses could say, well, listen, I'm only half of the matter. How can you kill me? You wouldn't have killed the defendant if it wasn't for the other guys. And the other guys who say we saw the selling, they could say also, well, we only saw the selling. But if it wasn't for the first set of witnesses that saw him steal the person, then the defendant would not have gotten killed. So therefore, since each one is only testifying about half a matter, we cannot apply the law of Edim Zomamin. That's Chizkiya's opinion. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan, they follow Rabbanan who disagree with Rabbi Akiva. And they say when it says davar, a matter of testimony, that refers to even half of the testimony. And so according to them, since you do need both of them in order to convict the person of capital punishment. So therefore, both are responsible for almost giving this defendant capital punishment. And therefore, even if only one, or even if both are found to be edim zomamin, they both get capital punishment for lying, because their testimony was in fact necessary for giving the person capital punishment. So even though it was necessary in conjunction with another, it depended on someone else, but nevertheless, since their testimony brought it to that point that it would be capital punishment, we kill each of the sets of witnesses. Now, umodeh Chizkiya be'edim ha'acharonim shel ben sorer umoreh sheuzmu sheneheragin mitoch sheyochalim lomar harishonim lalkoto banu v'hane acharine kuleh davar ka'abdi leh. Now, even Chizkiya, who says we say davar ve'lo chatzi davar, that you need one set of witnesses on the whole event, the whole crime that would lead to capital punishment, and not if it's only part of it. But they would agree in the case of Ben Sorer Moreh. When do you kill a Ben Sorer Moreh? First, he has to go and steal and eat meat and wine and all that, and we warn him, and for the first time he does that, we give him lashes. Then, if he does all that again, only then do we give him capital punishment. So, what if you have one set of witnesses that saw him do it the first time, and they gave him lashes, and then a second set of witnesses, different people, that saw him do it the second time. So let's say that second set of witnesses, edim acharonim, are found to be edim zomemin. Chizkiah would agree that they are killed. Why? Because the first ones can say, listen, we only came to testify to flog him. So our testimony is separate. Our testimony stands by itself, is only for flogging. And the second set, their testimony is entirely about capital punishment. Because is two separate crimes in effect. Right? One crime that's punishable in and of itself by flogging, that's finished. He did that already. And now the second set of witnesses is taking him all the way to capital punishment. And so even Chizkiah would say, that's a whole davar, that's a whole testimony, not half of it. Whereas beforehand, if they would either just steal or either just sell, then there would not be capital punishment at all. And so you need both of them to get capital punishment. And either of them by itself would not be punished. But here, since the first step is already punished by flogging, so that stands alone, and the entire weight of capital punishment is on the second one, and that's where, therefore, Chizkiah said, I would agree that in that case, that the second set does get, if they're found to be edim zomamin, does get capital punishment. מתקיף לה רב פאפא, אי הכי עדי מחירה נמי לקטלה, מתוך שיכולין עדי גנבה לומר, להלקותו בנו. Rav Papa rejects this application that we just made, that according to Chizkiah, in the case of a Ben Sorer Umoreh, the second set of witnesses should be liable to the death penalty, because the first set of witnesses that saw the Ben Sorer Umoreh sin the first time can say, oh, we just wanted to give him lashes. And so those are separate, and therefore the second ones are considered their own testimony only for giving him capital punishment, and therefore Chizkiah would agree that the second set gets capital punishment. So Rav Papa says, I don't agree with that application, because if you say that, then in the case of kidnapping and selling, the second set of witnesses to the selling also then should be killed, because the first set of witnesses to the kidnapping can say, we came to give him lashes. So we're assuming right now that, we're going to prove this in a second, that according to Chizkiah, let's say the person only kidnapped but didn't sell, and witnesses came and said, we saw this guy kidnap someone and he's found guilty, then he would get lashes. So therefore, this is the same as the Ben Sorer Moreh case, just like in the Ben Sorer case. The first set of witnesses give him lashes. The second of witnesses then get capital punishment because they're only doing capital punishment. So too, same should be true for Chizkiah. Chizkiah, as we're about to prove, thinks that someone who kidnaps but doesn't sell gets lashes. So therefore, the first set of witnesses to the kidnapping, they, if they're Adim Zoamin, they would get lashes. So they could say, we did the lashes. And then the second set of witnesses, they're about the selling. That's all for giving him capital punishment. And therefore, they should get capital punishment. But Chizkiah didn't say that. Chizkiah said that but either or, the witnesses to Geneva or the witnesses to Mechira, if they're found Adim Zoamin, neither gets capital punishment, but that should not be so if you're going to make this application. Now, if you think that Chizkiah doesn't think that the Edei Geneva would get lashes because of someone only kidnapped, they would not get lashes, but that's not true. We know that there is a machloket, that witnesses to Geneva who became Edim Zomamin, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan disagree. One of them says they get lashes. One of them says they don't get lashes. Now, we don't know which one's which, so we analyzed it. And it must be that Chizkiah is the one that says that they do get lashes. Since Chizkiah said earlier that if there are witnesses to both the kidnapping and the stealing, and they're both found to be Adim Zomamin, then neither of them are killed. And that leaves Rabbi Yochanan to disagree with that. The proof for this is actually going to be from the opposite, as we're about to say. In other words, we're going to prove that Rabbi Yochanan must think the opposite, that there is no lashes, and therefore Chizkiah thinks that there is lashes. As follows, Rabbi Yochanan, if you would say it's Rabbi Yochanan that thinks that there are lashes, it can't be. Since Rabbi Yochanan says that they do get lashes when you have Edim for Geneva and Edim for Mechira, and they're both found to be Edim Zomamin, they are both killed. So according to that, Havale lav shenitan lazarat mitat betin v'chol lav shenitan lazarat mitat betin en lokin alav. Well, in that case, this would be a prohibition that for which one could get capital punishment. There is a law that, let's say you do something that could get you capital punishment and also could get you lashes. Well, in that case, you don't get lashes. You don't get two punishments for one thing. So if you're going to get capital punishment, you don't get lashes. And even if potentially you could get capital punishment, even though you don't, still there's no lashes. And therefore, we can see according to the Rabbi Yochanan, that since either one of the two sets of witnesses, to Geneva or to Mechira, since if they would be found to be Edim Zoamin, they would get capital punishment, therefore they do not get lashes, even if they are lying. And whatever punishment the Edim Zoamin get or don't get, the defendant also himself will get or not get. Now, if the defendant will not get lashes for just stealing someone, so how could the witnesses who are found to be Edim Zomamin get lashes just for testifying about the stealing? Therefore, we conclude that Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says one does not get lashes. And if so, in this machloket, that means Chizkiah is the one that says one does get lashes. If that's true, and we just proved that is true, that Chizkiah thinks that one gets lashes for just stealing, then the Edim Zomamin also will get lashes just for stealing. So since the first set of witnesses regarding the Geneva, they can come and testify, listen, when we testified, we were testifying just about the flogging. We had nothing to do with the capital punishment. Leave us out of this. And so, fine, if they're found to be Edim Zomamin, they will get flogged. And then the second set of witnesses regarding the Mechira, it's all up to them regarding the capital punishment. They are solely responsible for capital punishment, and therefore they should get capital punishment. Therefore, Rav Papa concludes it does not make sense to say that according to Chizkiah, both the edim for mechira, edim for geneba, and the edim for mechira will not get capital punishment. That's not their opinion. Ela amar Rav Papa, be'edem mechira dekula amala peligi de neheragin. In fact, regarding the second set of witnesses for the sale, everyone agrees, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, that if they're found to be edim zomamin, they will be killed. Chizkiah already said that before. Chizkiah said either set of witnesses will get the capital punishment, and now Rav Papa is saying Chizkiah also will agree with that because, according to them, the Geneva, they're responsible for flogging. So the Mechira are solely responsible for capital punishment, and everybody agrees that if they're found to be Zoamin, Edem Mechira will get capital punishment. Ki Pelige Be'edem Geneva, they only argue regarding the first set. Chizkiah Amar En Haragin, Geneva Lechuda Kaima, Mechira Lechuda Kaima. Chizkiah says they're not killed because these are considered two separate prohibitions. The stealing is one, and the selling is a separate matter. And therefore, we consider the first group to be out of the way. They just argued regarding stealing, the kidnapping, which would be flogging, so that's a separate prohibition, and they don't deserve capital punishment for that. Rabbi Yochanan amar neheragin geneba atchalta de mechirahi. Rabbi Yochanan says they are also killed because the kidnapping is the first step in the process towards selling. How could you sell someone if you didn't kidnap them first? And so therefore, it's just a setup. It's step one of two steps of the full crime. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan considers that the Edeh Mechira, the Edeh Geneva, and the Edeh Mechira both will get capital punishment because we consider it all one group, and you can't have the second one without the first one. So he says that everybody gets, both sets can get capital punishment if they're found to be Edim Zomamin. Umodeh Rabbi Yochanan be'edim arishonim shel ben sorer umoreh shehuzmu she'en neheragin mitoch sheyecholin lomar lahalkoto banu. And now Gemara notes that Rabbi Yochanan would agree regarding ben sorer umoreh that the first set of witnesses that saw him steal and eat the first time around, if they become edim zomamin, they do not get capital punishment because they can say, we came in order to make this kid liable to lashes, because he gets lashes the first time around. So that's certainly considered a separate crime, and they can say we came to give him lashes, and they would get lashes, but they certainly would not get capital punishment, because how would they know that there's going to be a second set of witnesses afterwards? That has nothing to do with them, so that's consistent with the way we interpreted Rabbi Yochanan just now. Amar Abaye, hakomodim beben sorer moreh, v'hakomodim beben sorer moreh, umachloket beben sorer moreh. Abaye teaches three things, but in summary form, just as a mnemonic, but you have to know how to fill it in, which we will do right now. He says everybody agrees regarding one law that has to do with ben sorer moreh, and also regarding a second law, but there's machloket regarding a third aspect of ben sorer moreh law. What are they? Hakomodim ben sorer moreh be'edim arishonim she'en neheragin mitoch sheyecholin lomar lahalkoto banu. Everybody agrees, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, that when it comes to the first set of witnesses that testify that the ben sorer moreh stole meat and ate and drank meat and wine the first time around, that if they are found to be edim zomamin, they're not killed because they can come and say, we came to testify to give this person lashes. So give us lashes, fine. But we weren't going to give him capital punishment on our own. It was a separate crime. Hakomodim beben sorer moreh, bedim achronim sheneragin, mitoch she'adim harishonim yecholin lomar lalkoto banu, v'hane kuleh davar ka'abdi leh. And also, everyone agrees, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, that regarding a ben sorer, the second set of witnesses that saw him steal and eat meat and wine the second time around, if they found it to be edim zomamin, they do get capital punishment. Why? Because the first set of witnesses can say, listen, we came to give him flogging. Okay, he got lashes. We're done. We're out of the picture. He got that punishment. The second set of witnesses is entirely responsible for giving him capital punishment, and that's called davar. That's called the entire matter of testimony. that they are responsible for. And so everybody would agree with that. Umachloket beben sorer moreh, shenaim omrim befanenu ganab, ushenaim omrim befanenu achal. But there is a machloket regarding this case. Let's say two witnesses, this is talking about the second set. Now, we flogged him, he already did it the first time around. And now, the second time around, two witnesses say, we saw him steal money from his father. And this other one said, we saw him go buy meat and wine, and he ate and drank the meat and wine. So in that case, let's say both are found to be edim zomemin. Would they both get killed? Rabbi Yochanan would say, yes, they both get killed because these are two steps in one process, and therefore you can't do the eating without the stealing, so they all get capital punishment. Whereas Chizkiah would say, wait a second, the first ones, we treat it by itself. Ganav, if he only stole but didn't eat the meat and wine, he wouldn't have gotten capital punishment. So we consider that by itself, and therefore, according to Chizkiah, the ones who said that he stole would not get capital punishment. Amarav Asi, Ade Mechira Benefesh Shehuzmu, En Neheragin, Mitoch Shechol Omar, Avdi Macharti. Now, a new opinion. Rav Aseh says, let's say the witnesses that said regarding someone who kidnaps and sold, but the witnesses come and say, we saw him sell. They didn't see that the person was kidnapped, so we don't know how the person got into his possession. We only have the witnesses that said, we saw him sell this person, and they become edim zoamin. They are not killed, right? This is in contradiction to the previous opinions. Why? Because they could say, because the defendant can say, oh, you know who I sold? That was my slave. I didn't kidnap that person. I owned that person. He was my Eved Kana'ani, and so I sold the Eved Kana'ani. That's not capital punishment. And so the second set of witnesses, without a first set of witnesses regarding Geneva, they would not make the defendant liable to capital punishment, because the person can say, I own that person already. So therefore, Edem Mechira by themselves are not responsible for giving capital punishment, and so if they're found to be Edim Zomamin, they do not get capital punishment. Amar Rav Yosef, Keman Azla Hashmata de Rav Aseh. Rav Yosef asks, which opinion is Rav Aseh following? Rabbi Akiva Damar Davar velo Chasi Davar. Oh, he must be following Rabbi Akiva's opinion, who says that one is liable to Edim Zomamin law only if he gives the entire testimony. In this case, it would be Geneva and Mechira, but not half a thing, because here he only says half of a matter, because he only testified about the selling and not about the kidnapping. Amar le'Abaye, di karabanan nehragin, hamitoch ka'amar. Rabbi disagrees with that assessment of Rav Yosef, because he's saying, now if you follow Rabbanan who say even Chatzi Davar you can be Edim Zomamin, then you would kill him? You still wouldn't, because he gave a reason. Rav Aseh explained his reasoning of mitoch. Mitoch would apply no matter what you say about Davar, if it's Chatzi Davar or not Chatzi Davar, that doesn't matter. Even if you say in general that you can be an Ed Zomem and get the punishment, even if you only give part of it, even if you would say that, like Rabbanan, here you would not get capital punishment, because the Edem Mechira could say, we didn't do anything. The defendant could easily have said, I sold a slave that was mine, and therefore there's no punishment. He did something that's perfectly permitted. And so he would not get any punishment. So Edim Zomin don't get any punishment. That's the reason. It's a mitoch reason, nothing to do with Davar. So that's what Abaye concludes, that Avaseh would be according to anybody. Ela filu tema Rabbanan ubedala atu geneva. Therefore, Rav Aseh would say his law, even according to Rabbanan, but only if the Edeh Geneva did not come. Right? If let's say you had Edeh Geneva first, we saw him steal it, and then Edem Mechira come and say, we saw him sell it, well then, there was no mitoch argument, because the defendant could not say, he was mine, he was my slave. No, we have witnesses that said, we saw you take this guy off the street and kidnap him. So, only if there are no Edeh Geneva. Well, now we ask, wait, if there's no Geneva, Edeh Geneva at all, then it's obvious, Rav Aseh's law, right? Everybody would agree with that. What's the chidush? La siricha da'afagav da'atu basof. His chidush is even if the Edeh Geneva come afterwards. So what happens is, the first set of witnesses that come are edeh mechira. We saw this guy sell to that one. And then the defendant can say, oh, I belong to me. Okay, and now if they're found edim zoamin, they go after. What if they're not found edim zoamin just yet? And after they testify, then Edei Geneva come and said, we also saw him that he kidnapped this person in the first place. And then the Edei Mechira are found to be Edim Zomemin. So the Chidush is, even though at this point the defendant could not have said, oh, he belonged to me, there's no mitoch argument. Nevertheless, the Edim Mechira, who are found to be Edim Zomin, do not get a punishment, since at the time that they testified was before the Edei Geneva came, and at that time, their mitoch argument would have applied. Okay, still, isn't that obvious too? La sericha deka meramezi remuze, mahu detema remiza militahi, kamashmalan remiza lav kelumhu. Oh, it's coming to add even a greater chidush. Let's say we saw some gesturing, some hinting between the Edei Mechira and the Edei Geneva, right? We saw even before they came to testify, they were making signs with each other, like they knew each other, and they knew that the other one was going to come and testify. And so you might think, if you think that gesturing is a significant form of communication, then you might think, oh look, they're all colluding. And then you would say, so when the Edei Mechira come first, and they say, we saw him sell, so then you might think we cannot apply mitoch, even at that point, because for sure, they already know that there's testimony regarding the sale, and so we shouldn't consider it as if they all came together, or as if the Edei Geneva came first, the Edei Mechira came first. If the Edei Geneva came first, and then the Edei Mechira, certainly everybody would agree that the Edei Mechira are killed. So the fact that they came after, but they were gesturing beforehand, so they knew about each other. So you might think that Edei Mechira would be killed in this case, and therefore Rav Aseh comes to teach us, not so. We don't consider gesturing to mean anything. I don't know what they were gesturing about. Maybe you were just asking about the weather or the time. We can't consider that a significant form of communication. And therefore, when the Edei Mechira come and say, we saw this guy sell some person, at that point, the mitoch argument stands. The defendant could say at that point, oh, he was my slave, he belonged to me. And therefore, the Mechira cannot be held liable, even if they become Edim Zomamin, for capital punishment, because their testimony by itself would not make him give him capital punishment. Then, if the Edei Geneva come after, even though they were gesturing to each other beforehand, now this is new information that he also stole the person, kidnapped him. Okay, now it's true the mitoch wouldn't work anymore, but it did work at the time of the testimony of the Edei Mechira, and therefore the Edei Mechira, according to Rav Aseh, do not get capital punishment. That brings us to the next Mishnah of a Zaken Mamre, who is the next person on the list who will get the punishment of chenek. Zaken Mamre al pi bet din shenemar ki palem mechar davar lamishpat, a rebellious elder who rebels against the court, the Bet Din HaGadol, the Sanhedrin. This is based on the pasuk that if you don't know a difficult matter in your local court, then you should go up to the place that Hashem will choose. You go up to Yerushalayim and you ask over there from the high court, and you have to do everything that they say. And if you veer from the matter that they teach you, right or left, then that person will get the death penalty. So now we elaborate. Shelosha bete din hayu sham. Echad yoshev al petach harabait, ve'echad yoshev al petach hazara, ve'echad yoshev b'lishkat hagazit. There were 3 high courts in Jerusalem, each one higher than the other. One was at the entrance of the Temple Mount, and one was at the entrance of the temple courtyard, and one was the chamber of hewn stone, which is actually part of the Bet HaMikdash building itself. There's an entrance from the outside, so you don't have to go to the inside, otherwise only Kohanim could get in there. So you can get in from the outside, but that's the Sanhedrin HaGadol, is the highest level, but then the second highest and third highest. Now, if some local court in some city, they don't know the law regarding something, or there's a dispute regarding the law that they cannot resolve, then they come to the third highest court that's on the Temple Mount. Ve'omer, kach darashti v'kach darshu chaverai, kach limadati v'kach limedu chaverai, im shamu amar lehem. So the highest of the court that they came from, he comes and says, this is how I interpreted the matter, but my colleagues interpreted it otherwise. Or this is how I taught it, and this is how they taught it. Whether it's something that's based on a interpretation of a pasuk, darashti, or something that's based on a tradition or reason. So he comes and explains what their quandary is. If that court knows the answer, they have a tradition, then they'll tell them, and then they'll be happy, and everybody will go home. But let's say the third highest court doesn't know the answer. V'im lav, ba'in lahen leotan shal petach hazara. They come to the second highest court, that's in front of the courtyard of the Bet HaMikdash. Ve'omer, kach tarashi v'kach tarshu chaberai, kach limati v'kach limidu chaberai, im shamu amar lehem. And he says again, this is how this is what I interpreted, this is how my colleagues interpreted, this is what I taught, this is what they taught, right? This was our dispute, and we don't know the answer. If they know the answer, good. Then they'll say, oh, we have a tradition, and then everybody will go home. Ve'im lav. But if even the second highest court doesn't know the answer, then these and those, meaning the judges of the highest judges of each of the lower courts, they don't know the answer. So they all gather together. So you have more and more judges each time coming, and they will come to the highest court, the Sanhedrin, that's in the chamber of hewn stone. Because that is the supreme court from which Torah will emerge to all of Israel. That's it. They're the highest authority. From the place that Hashem will choose. Okay, and then they will say what the matter is. There's no, if they don't already know from a tradition, then they'll discuss it and they'll vote on it and there'll be a majority. And whatever the majority is, that's it. That is the Supreme Court ruling. There's no higher authority. That's the law of the land and everybody needs to follow it. Now, Chazar le'edah. What if that elder went back to his city? The elder originally had a problem and didn't know and had a dispute with his colleagues that they couldn't resolve. He went to the Supreme Court. They told him, here's the law. Then he goes back to his city. If he teaches the same thing that he taught before, even if it's different from what the Sanhedrin said, but he taught it theoretically, that's okay. He can teach theoretically. But he teaches, if he teaches in practice, if he makes a practical ruling in his city against what the Sanhedrin said, then he is liable to capital punishment. Shneimar, a person who does ya'aseh, he has to rule in practice, and he does it on purpose. He knows what he's doing. He's rebelling against the Sanhedrin. This is very bad. This is very dangerous. And he would get capital punishment, even if it's not a capital punishment case. Even if a case is regarding a small matter of lashes or a fine. Does this person owe $2 or doesn't owe $2? They go to the Sanhedrin. He says, no, he doesn't owe $2. This guy goes back and rules in the exact same case. You have to pay $2. That elder would get capital punishment. Why? Because since he's an elder, he's an authority, a respected person. If he would go against the Supreme Court, it can threaten the authority of the Supreme Court. And if he does that, then it will weaken the entire structure, the entire legislative and judicial structure. So you need to have the Sanhedrin, the highest court, you need to have that everybody obeys them and follows their rulings. Now, if theoretically you want to say, listen, I think otherwise, I have a verse, I have an interpretation, okay, all day long we study Torah and we bring different opinions. That's totally fine. That's even wonderful. But bottom line, if an actual case comes, we need to have one law in the land. Talmid shehorad la'asot patur nimsa chumro kulo. Now, if a student, not an elder, not a respected authority, but just a student, let's say he rules on a certain matter against the Sanhedrin, while he's not supposed to do that, he will not get capital punishment because he's only a student. So his ruling against the Sanhedrin will not threaten the authority of the Sanhedrin. So we see that his stringency is his leniency. There's a stringency in that we don't let him give authoritative rulings because he's only a student. But it turns out because he doesn't have authority to do that, it's also a leniency in that if he would give a ruling against the Sanhedrin, okay, he doesn't get capital punishment. He's not such a threat. Only if someone is very important, is a zaken, and he goes against the Sanhedrin, that person can threaten the authority of the whole Sanhedrin and the whole judicial structure, and so therefore the rebellious elder deserves capital punishment of chenek. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.